when they briefed about bone mass density in these new recruits, that was stunning to me. Kids breaking their legs doing a road march and then gaining unprecedented amounts of bone mass just during basic training they didn't think was possible. Call of Duty is killing us.
Team, welcome back to another week of the Mops and Mo's podcast with Drew and Alex. We were going to banter mindlessly, but we will not, because in today's episode we have a general, and we don't want this podcast to be listened to and for people not to take us seriously. We want to catch more generals, so we're not bantering, except for the fact that getting the general to come on was a bit of a experience. Alex?
Yeah. This one will be both like an explanation for people of like what the process is for making the podcast happen. And also this is like slightly aimed at General Harter's public affairs / strategic communications staff.
Of which there are several.
Yeah. So some of our guests, we just kind of like text them because we know them, or we slide into their DMs because they're big on social media or whatever it is. That's one of the ways we get guests. For the bigger deal guests, so to speak, and General Harter falls into this category, it generally involves emailing a representative of theirs. Sometimes we get introduced to them by people who know them, but you have to convince them that this platform is good for their message, yada, yada, yada. So we have this whole media kit thing. If you've got a guest you think should come on that's like senior and special, you can have the media kit. Just let us know. It's just an explanation of what the platform is, how many people listen to it, all that kind of stuff. So there were multiple back and forth things with General Harter's team, largely around making sure we don't get him in trouble with Congress, because there are some politically sensitive topics and he's not in control of everything. He has to go and get money and he has to go and get approval for things.
And we are the #1 podcast in Congress.
Probably. Sure. We'll take
That's
it. I'll put that on the media kit.
Yep.
But I will say the staff was great to work with. They were easy to communicate with. They were awesome. They were very much just kind of trying to protect the interests of General Harter and the Army Reserve. But I will also say that General Harter may have been slightly more candid on the episode than they might have wanted him to be based on the conversations I had with them as we were planning it.
Whoops.
Normally, some of these senior folks, their public affairs team is also on the line with us. When we did NASA, their public affairs was on the line. When we did the SEAC, their public affairs was on the line, all that kind of stuff. General Harter was not chaperoned when he came on the episode, and he was very candid on a few things.
He signed in as Bob. So
yeah.
Thanks, Bob, for coming on.
So we appreciate that. I think it leads to better, more candid, honest episodes. So if that stresses out his team, I apologize, guys. Sorry.
It's not our fault.
No. So anyway, on to the introduction. Lieutenant General Robert, aka Bob Harter, was confirmed by the U.S. Senate on August 1st, 2024, and assumed the dual role of Chief of the Army Reserve and Commanding General U.S. Army Reserve Command. So it is a two-hat role. I think he discusses that a little bit in the episode.
Mm-hmm.
He's both the guy who goes to Congress and gets the resources and the guy who runs the actual command. And that's unique within the Army. As the Chief of Army Reserve, General Harter is the principal advisor on Army Reserve matters to the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army. As Commanding General of U.S. Army Reserve Command, the other hat, he leads a community-based force of more than 174,000 citizen soldiers and 11,000 civilians, with a footprint that encompasses all 50 states, 5 U.S. territories, and more than 23 countries across the globe. His previous general officer assignments include Commanding General of the 81st Readiness Division, which is the division that piloted H2F for the Army Reserve. You'll hear about that. Deputy Chief of Army Reserve, Chief of Staff for Army Materiel Command, and Commanding General 316th Expeditionary Sustainment Command deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. After graduating from Virginia Tech in 1988 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in communication, General Harter received his active duty commission as a field artillery officer. He also holds a Master of Science degree in National Security Strategy from the National War College. As his initial active duty assignment, and this one threw me for a loop a little bit, and I'll explain why, General Harter served as a platoon leader in the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, Bad Hersfeld, Germany, and deployed to Desert Storm. Little bit trippy for me because I, like many people, think of the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment as the OP-4 at Fort Irwin National Training Center. But back in the 90s, the 11th ACR was doing all sorts of stuff before the fall of the Berlin Wall. I guess back in the 80s even, but they stayed in Germany into the 90s. I think it was 1994 when they moved to Fort Irwin. Needless to say, General Harter's been in the Army for quite a while. That is not a dig. I'm not calling him old. He actually looks great. And
He
I was
does look great.
surprised that he'd been in that long. Clearly very fit, cares about fitness.
Mhm.
So after that, Branch transferred to the Ordnance Corps, completed active duty assignments with the 101st Corps Support Group at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and the U.S. Army Munitions Center and School at Redstone Arsenal, Alabama. General Harter then transferred from active duty to the Active Guard and Reserve Program, AGR, in 1999. His AGR assignments include Support Operations Officer, 55th Sustainment Brigade, Distribution Management Center Chief, 316th Expeditionary Sustainment Command. That was the deployment for Operation Iraqi Freedom, and Assistant Chief of Staff, Office of Chief of Army Reserve. General Harter and his wife Erin have been married for over 35 years and have 3 children. They live currently in Stafford, Virginia, although it sounds like the 2 hats he wears means he spends a lot of time at Fort Bragg as well. Fort Liberty, sorry.
Oh, whoa, Fort Liberty.
Yep.
Yeah. So we said this in the episode. We do a little bit of workshopping here, which is always fun to do some workshopping with somebody who can actually make big decisions and implement big changes. But one of the reasons why we wanted to have this episode was because we've talked obviously at length about embedded human performance. And I think for most people, that means active duty soldiers there every day, facilities, equipment, technology, blah, 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 blah. For the Guard and Reserves, it's very different calculus. You don't have everyone there every day. You don't have equipment. You don't have resources. You don't have facilities. I mean, you might have some of those things, but the nature of the Guard and the Reserve is that these are, is part-time soldiers like a derogatory?
I think it's fair. I'm a part-time soldier and I'm okay with it.
Right. So typically, in case people don't know, you report once a month and then 1 week a year, correct? No, 2 weeks a year. Um, and the questions we were asking in this episode, or that we are asking in this episode, are how do you build a successful human performance program given those limitations? How do you reach people the other 29 days out of the month? What sort of technology does that look like? How do you solve for those problems? We don't have all the answers, but we were able to have a sit down with General Harter, who is the man responsible for having or procuring all of those answers. So kind of a unique opportunity and definitely a lot of fun. So thanks to him for coming on to hang out with us.
Enjoy. Are there any questions you have for us before we just dive into chatting?
How'd you guys get started with this?
Ooh.
It's a good question, Alex.
So technically it started as a social media platform before it started as a
he started
podcast.
he started the Instagram.
Yeah, he's taking the interview here. We're going all the way back to the start of the Instagram. I was working at the Army Physical Fitness School.
There we were.
Master fitness trainer. And it was a little bit of a frustrating time. You've probably experienced things like this, but the Army was launching the ACFT, and there was a lot of information I and we at the school thought that the Army should have in terms of how to train, components of fitness, things like this. But we kept getting put on like media blackout things, and there's lots of approval processes before you can share stuff. And because the ACFT was so political, we were not like let loose to share that information. So I just created something to do it on my own. And the timing happened to be really good that's like when H2F kicked off and a lot of people were looking for answers about things, and then eventually brought Drew on board.
Okay.
I had just left. I've done human performance my whole career. I was with Air Force Special Operations and then had just left. And I think when we first met, I was giving a brief to.
Yeah, you were we brought you
Somewhere.
on to do an LPD for the fitness
Yes.
school.
And I'll never forget because it was a beautifully done brief. I finished it. Alex texted me or called me afterwards and was like, "Hey, great brief, but like it never switched past your first slide." So on my computer, it was going through the slides, but for the however many people were listening, nobody wanted to chime in. So anyway, we literally started this just to initially to talk to, I think, predominantly strength and conditioning coaches who were coming into embedded human performance in the military, because most of them didn't have a clue. I mean, they were coming from sport or private sector.
Yeah.
And then it just sort of snowballed into much broader conversations. We got into like VA stuff. We got into, I mean, now Guard and Reserve type stuff. We still revert back to reps and sets occasionally because it's what the people want. But there's some hills we want to die on, and so far we haven't gotten in trouble. So knock on wood.
Good, good. No, that's awesome. It's a great story, and
Here we are.
yeah, here we are. I'm looking forward to engaging with you two heroes.
Okay, ready? Kick off. Easy question, softball question, maybe the $1 million question. Let's go through the challenges of creating human performance in a part-time environment.
Yeah.
As
Well,
you
I tell
see
you, so first, I mean, I'll lead off with I was not a believer in H2F.
Why?
Well, I'll tell because I just I wasn't I was uneducated, quite frankly, looking back now. And I'll be tell you, it's my old man gave me some advice one time. Never take money advice from somebody who has less money than you. And it seems like I had a lot of folks giving me advice about fitness that didn't look nearly as fit as I was. Right. And I'd always taken it seriously. Right. Have you ever had, and I don't want this to go off the rails right away, but an overweight nutritionist telling you what you should eat? It's
like a skinny chef.
I'm like, okay, right. That was probably part of it. I figured I played high school sports. I had worked out. I'd been in the Army a long time. I'd always stay fit, did well on my PT tests. And not that I didn't buy into it, right? But I'm not sure if all this works, the money you're spending. And then once I got to the 81st Rangers Division, right? And then I saw the Soldier Performance Rangers Center that they have at Fort Jackson. And then I saw the nutritionists there and the strength and conditioning coaches they had there. And then had my team of Army Reserve soldiers, but I had a physical therapist, I had a nutritionist on orders, I had a strength and conditioning coach on contract, I had a master fitness trainer, and they started going through the sleep. And I said, at first I was like, listen, we'll do the best we can to get this out to the Army Reserve formations. And then I became a believer of what they were selling. When we started to have, they wanted to have, hey, let's do a 2-week AT at our headquarters. We'll run it because we were running the pilot for the Army Reserve on H2F, how to integrate it. And let's pulse all the commands kind of in the Southeast. And for those soldiers who are flagged, right, for overweight, can't pass a PT test, have some kind of issue, they're not supposed to go and do AT anyway. They can't. Let them come to us for 2 weeks. And we set up a camp, and it was life-changing for some of those kids that were putting stuff into it. How to eat, how to just do the ACFT if you're not doing deadlifts, if you're not a member of the CrossFit cult and you're not sure how all that works, right? And so I was like, okay, I'm starting to become a believer in these workouts, and 20 minutes were smoking me. And it was, so anyway, I bought in. So back to your question, Drew, on how you take this, nationwide. When we first started going through, I'm like, I got to have a means for the non-commissioned officers and the leaders in a formation to maintain touch points with their soldiers when they're not at battle assembly, whether it's probably app, some kind of virtual capacity where they can come together. And it's got to be kind of voluntary, and, kids got to buy into it. It's got to be, competitive. But then as I started seeing what the professionals bring, I'm like, we've got to figure out how to get our professionals out to where soldiers are having battle assembly, out to our big training areas where I have thousands of Army Reserve soldiers coming through, and start educating and getting the master fitness trainers, now the integrators, involved, and change the culture. Once you buy into the culture, that's when it becomes a game changer that I've seen. And then it's maintaining those touch points. So it is a challenge. I think we're going to have to partner with our active duty teammates and make sure Army Reserve kids can go on to a Fort Liberty or a Fort Moore or whatever if they're nearby, and have a touch point with a Spark, and also with our National Guard teammates. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what we're working through. When I was at the 81st Rangers Division, it's ironic because I was trying to, as I started to buy in, I was trying to sell the Army Reserve headquarters, USARC at Fort Liberty. Hey, we need some money. I need someone to take this seriously. How are we doing this? We got to get it out to the 2-star commands that own all these soldiers. And they were mildly interested. They're much more interested now.
Well, I think we're probably going to take this conversation in a direction where we workshop some of the challenges and ways we might get after it. But before I do that, I got to plug in a shout out. So you were at 81st RD, and I've bumped into Major Laverty and Major Waring and Sarah Hyatt and that whole team. But I got to ask, was the Was the contract strength coach who got you to buy in on the fitness side of this Brad Pasker?
It was.
So I'll just speak to Brad.
Shout
Hell
out,
yeah.
Brad.
Brad was he was one of my NCOs at the physical fitness school teaching master fitness trainer before he went off to finish his master's degree and started doing awesome stuff at USC and all that. So
Yeah, and he's back, right? We got banged up on money by the Army Reserve kind of at the end. We're good to go now. And last time I talked to Rachel, Brad's back and driving on it. So yeah, he was the guy.
awesome. So I think to dig into the challenges, I think one of the obvious ones is just copy pasting the same staffing model and operations model from active duty to the reserve component is just not going to produce the same kind of results, right? We know it's a different problem set. We're geographically dispersed. We're 2 days a month for most folks. There's nothing we can do fitness wise 2 days a month that's going to make a difference if they don't change their behavior the rest of the month. What's out there right now in terms of how the Army Reserve expects to extend influence beyond battle assembly to influence health and fitness behaviors? Because that seems like the hardest part for me.
So yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you, Alex. What we started, are you familiar with the Coach Me Plus? You probably are.
Yeah, I
But
mean, haven't used it personally, but I'm familiar with
yeah,
the concept. Yeah.
it's okay, right? It's actually O2X, which was who Brad was working for.
Mhm.
They had developed an app, and it was so I don't know how else you do it other than building the culture at Battle Assembly and then having a networked at team level, at NCO level and unit level, and be tracking it, right? At company level that says, hey, what are you doing when you're not at Battle Assembly? And it's some of selling the culture of you don't have to be on orders, and this is where it can get a little bit. I don't know. I think kids are buying into it, right? Because we say, remember why we exist: close with and destroy the enemies of the United States in the unforgiving crucible of ground combat, right? And so 39 days a year is what we get to train. But if something bad happens, we're going, right? And so you owe it those other 27 days a month to try to do something to take care of yourself. You got a commitment to your family, right? Your children, your parents, your spouse, whatever, to take care of yourself and the American people and your teammates in the United States Army Reserve who are going to be counting on you. And so I think we've kind of cracked that. And the ACFT, again, kind of driving that. Be interested in your thoughts on the ACFT for the Army. I know the Army leadership is churning through that right now, but again, not sure I was a believer, but that is a culture changer on how it's not just push-ups, sit-ups, 2 mile run. So the ACFT has been helpful in getting kids focused on, okay, how do I do better on that? Oh yeah, this is a little more holistic. But I don't know, Alex, how we get away from the virtual, some sort of app. It's almost seems sophomoric now, but some sort of virtual connection where I'm holding leaders accountable for, hey, check on your soldiers, how many calories they burned today. Can we issue wearables? That's what we're trying to do in the 81st. Can everybody have a wearable? Let's just track. Where are you? Where's your heart rate? How's your sleep? What'd you eat today? And so that's what we're trying to work through.
So we're getting into the meat of the workshopping part of this conversation, right? I think both Drew and I have some experience with various different apps, various different wearables regimes and things like that. I'll give you one off the top, and this is like speaking to the audience as well. Apps are interesting tools, but an app alone won't do anything. And what we've seen in military settings in particular, because there's been a bunch of pilots of these things, various active duty and reserve units have played with a few different apps that the Army is considering and things like that. If you can get the chain of command to actively communicate to people inside the app, that's where the secret sauce is. Like a coach messaging somebody means a little bit. An app sending a push notification means nothing. Like your squad leader or your first sergeant or somebody actually interacting with you on there, that means a lot more.
But here's my thing, though. I think this is me, an N of one, thinking about this from a reserve standpoint, because we use an app on the active duty side. But I think to Alex's point, what will drive engagement in an app is like a sense of community, and we can create that because we're in person. And I've worked, I mean, for years and years with different kind of remote telehealth type organizations that use technology, and that's great. You might have 10,000 clients on your app, but if they only feel like an N of one in that space, I don't think you get at the point of the thing, which is to create a sense of community. So I would almost look to a lot of the more community driven fitness platforms out there. I mean, Strava is one that comes to mind. Garmin has community building features, but ways in which I, as an individual, if I'm, I don't know, by myself in the middle of North Dakota and I'm in the reserves, I know that there's a ton of other reservists out there doing the thing I'm doing. But if I don't feel connected to them in some way, those 29 days out of the month, it kind of defeats the purpose. Like, it's cool to have my workout on my phone, but if I don't know what my buddies are doing, I don't think that really, and I don't know. I'm speaking about myself here. I don't know if the military app space is going after the community feature as much as they're going after the reps and sets and data feature. Those are two different things, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point, Drew. I think on what we are trying to get after is that community piece. Because exactly to your point, and kind of what Alex was saying about chain of command, where you create some kind of, like, within a squad, 8 soldiers, an NCO, or even in a platoon, and you got some sort of competition. And it's, hey, how many calories you burned today? What did you do today? And everybody's checking up on each other. Where are you? What's going on? And then I think it does start with that's where the teams that we have are so important. That first touch point where the professionals go out there and they're working with that unit and they show them that, hey, here's what you do. Here's how you think. Here's how the app works. Here's how you measure each other. We're going to do it here. We're going to test this. Hey, let me develop 10 different workouts for you to get from point A to point B. Here's where you are. Now you guys and gals get after it. And we're going to all come together in a virtual forum in 2 weeks, and we're going to see where we are and how everybody's doing and who's lying to who on the app. And that's where you got to get, I think, is a formation. And it's culture.
Mm-hmm.
They do so much other stuff on their phones. I don't.
Ugh.
You're youngsters, I'm sure you do. But
Alex is big. Alex is big on the phone.
Too big. It's a problem. I'm working on it.
But it's the community thing, I think, that really, I agree with you, drives it.
So you brought up the ACFT, and I think we were going to bring up the ACFT anyway in terms of how it's being absorbed in the Army Reserve. And I know I transitioned from active to reserve while the ACFT was like settling into place, kind of. It was already a thing, but we hadn't enforced the first graded one yet. And I'm curious about your perspective reserve wide on how they're adapting to the test. But I can tell you not my first reserve assignment, my second reserve assignment, I worked with Army Reserve Careers Group. And I was very lucky. A few people advocated for me to be able to do H2F work in my reserve capacity, got to bounce around to different battalions.
I can make that happen for you at a much grander scale.
I mean, conversation for after recording it.
Okay.
We'll stick around post-recording. We'll talk.
But the thing I saw a lot of, and this was true in active duty too, but it was just more acute in the Army Reserve, was people didn't know how to train for a test other than just doing the things a lot, right? APFT era, if you got to get better at push-ups, you just do a bunch of push-ups. If you got to get better at sit-ups, you just do a bunch of sit-ups. That's the whole thing. Now we're asking you to do things you might not have access to the equipment for, but it only took a few minutes to explain what component of fitness this thing is measuring and what some other examples of exercises you can do to train that component of fitness. And that's going to make you healthier and fitter anyway, right?
Right.
We have this conversation on here all the time. I have it with soldiers all the time. I don't think you're going to run into a bunch of hex bars on the battlefield. I don't think you're going to run into a bunch of 10-pound medicine balls on the battlefield. But I do think you're going to have to employ lower body strength and explosive power and aerobic capacity. So let's train those things. Here's how. And it's just one layer deeper of education. I don't think it's that much of a stretch to expect our soldiers to have a handle on what component of fitness we're testing. How would we train that component of fitness?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's making it out to the reserve yet, but that kind of education, I think, can go a really long way.
Yeah. And I think to your point, how does it get out there? I mean, kind of I was meeting with a young lady, she was probably a major in the Army Reserve. We're talking about the ACFT. And, she looked like she was in decent shape. She was in uniform. I didn't see her in PT gear working out. But she goes, I had never done a deadlift before. Never. So am I supposed to go to my gym and have someone explain to me how to do a deadlift? Or is that part of something that the Army kind of owns? If here's the test, And to your point, here's all the things that you got to do, even if you don't have the equipment. And this is why you do it, because it builds this and it builds that. And this is for, your dexterity and your anaerobic capacity and aerobic capacity. That's what we were missing. I think Compa won. I mean, you were still active duty kind of when it was transitioning over, Alex. You might have seen some of that. We kind of put the cart before the horse, I think, with ACFT versus H2F. But now that we have kind of both of them, that's where those H2F teams can make a big deal. I bet the team at the 81st, where it started, was maybe 80% of what they focused on was helping soldiers train for the ACFT, doing non-ACFT stuff, and then how that built into the total fitness regimen. And I think that's where we have to go.
Yeah, I think we're starting to get there. I will share, because I completely shared your opinion originally on the cart before the horse issue of H2F and then the ACFT. I was eventually convinced, because this was a General Frost decision, I believe. The problem was you needed the ACFT to prove to leaders that they needed H2F.
Yeah, maybe.
So, yes, it would have made much more sense to train first and then implement the test. But to get the Army to care, they had to push it there with something like the ACFT to reveal the gaps in the fitness.
Yeah, you're probably right. Light the house on fire to prove you need a fire department.
Pretty much what it is.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you a question purely out of curiosity, because I think I've posed this before to somebody not nearly as qualified as you as pertains to the reserves. But is there a world where the reserves have some sort of partnership with some fitness chain or affiliate or something where soldiers get access to gyms and equipment and some sort of network around the country? Is that in the realm of possible, or does that, I think, fall more in line with what you're saying earlier, soldiers having access to places like Fort Liberty, Fort Polk, et cetera, to be able to go and actually train?
So Drew, when we first started looking at how to get after the ACFT, we have partnerships. Some local communities can develop partnerships, one-offs, YMCA sometimes.
Yeah, YMCA.
Planet Fitness, right? But when this first came out with ACFT, one of the proposals was, and I'm not sure it was maybe somewhat knee-jerk, but hey, why don't we are we going to have to get Army Reserve soldiers, a membership at a local gym, or help augment that, or sign some big corporate deal? The Guard does some of that. We do not. I mean, we have some units can work some of that to support, but we don't have anything like that. I think it's probably something we need to look at. Right now, we're looking, I think, partnering with the National Guard, because they're embracing the H2F. Some states are better than others. South Carolina was fantastic. We were using a lot of their H2F integrators in our fort. We actually had a competition, Army Reserve versus National Guard, which we smoked them. They weren't ready, but no, they're great, right? And so I think that's where we'll get a little bang for the buck. I was a gym guy. And I'm preaching to the choir here, but H2F is not the gym. It's a subset of it, but I'd have a hard time saying, should we spend money on that until we've got everybody kind of bought into and trained up on this culture? And then that's kind of a subset of what you get after. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, it makes perfect sense.
I think Drew and I have had the conversation many times, and many of the people
we've solved all your
active
problems
component
already.
I wish you guys would send me just an email.
But there's a ton of people, even active component, we're hurting for facilities in some cases, we're hurting for equipment in some cases.
Yeah.
And does that help? It totally does. Is that a prerequisite to execute H2F? It is not. And I think we've established that at this point. I will say, in terms of cracking the code on the geographic dispersal piece, you mentioned with the National Guard, I think that absolutely makes sense. There are a few National Guard states that are way out ahead on this thing, doing awesome stuff. I'd also say, though, ROTC and recruiting locations. Both of those have some unique capabilities. There's several schools across the country that have really strong partnerships already in place for their ROTC programs, working with either the athletic department or the exercise science department at their local university. So there's partnerships waiting to happen there.
But how do you do that when there's not an athletic department? I'd be curious how those schools are.
That's why it has to be locally done, right? There's a difference between what you can offer. Like Auburn, for example, has a dedicated athletic trainer for the military, for the ROTC program. I think they're doing a bunch of research efforts. They're doing all sorts of cool stuff. not every school is going to be able to leverage that kind of stuff. I mean, just up the road from me, I've had a few conversations with Colorado State. They have some really cool stuff going on, both on the research side and the ROTC side. I mean, and this
Yeah.
is me being biased. It's weird to me that Recruiting Command doesn't have an H2F cell at the headquarters yet. I've been pitching that for a while now. But there's a potential synergy here where those same people, like I bet those schools that are doing research on human performance, especially tactical human performance, would love to do research on working with people pre-accessions before they even go to basic training,
Right.
and linking reserve, ROTC, and recruiting together allows them that opportunity. Everybody kind of wins from something like that. But
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I hadn't even thought about ROTC. We looked at some VOTEC, some of the technical college stuff and what they do down like in South Carolina's got a very robust system. But ROTC and the recruiting command and our recruiting locations would be a great place to start looking to partner. And were you two at the H2F symposium? It was like last
yep,
March, April at Fort Eustis or down there by the beach.
Mhm.
yeah,
When they briefed about bone mass density in these new recruits, that was stunning to me.
hmm
Kids
Mhm.
breaking their legs doing a road march and then gaining unprecedented amounts of bone mass just during basic training they didn't think was possible.
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
Call of
insane.
Duty is killing us.
No,
It's-
I don't know if USARIUM has briefed the results of the study. I think it's the Army study, ARMI.
Yeah.
They've done some internal briefs, but I don't think it's published publicly yet. I'm genuinely concerned that we're not that far from a world where you have to get a bone density scan to be eligible to enlist.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. It's like that movie where that old Disney movie where everybody was in like floating
yeah,
wheelchair.
Wally,
Oh,
the
Wally.
Wally.
documentary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wally.
Wally,
It's coming true.
classic. God, what a
Yeah.
good movie. Do you are there any like international partners who are going after the same kind of thing? I know they may not be as geographically dispersed. Obviously, we're much larger, but is this a conversation that other countries are having?
That's a great question, Drew. I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, we have not. We just had the Association of the United States Army Forum here at in the DC area in October, Columbus Day weekend, and then had a follow-on session. And I had actually a roundtable with allied reserve partners from Estonia, Poland, UK, Australia. Fitness and that kind of stuff never comes up with our allies. I would expect there's some that are probably getting after it, but yeah, it's mostly it's a big U.S. thing. I'm not sure allies are all in.
That's so interesting because we've had folks from other countries come on and it seems as though they have a lot of the same issues on the active duty
Yeah,
side. And
yeah,
I would think I'm obviously biased because this is my world, but like I would think that you would want your primary investment to be in your people, which I know sounds corny and cheesy, but
yeah.
if you have healthy people who can road march without breaking their legs, I would think that inevitably your return on investment with everything else you're throwing money into would probably be much higher. But it never really
Right.
seems to be that way. I don't know why that is.
Yeah, it almost seems to me like, and there's always been a little bit of this, right? But a disconnect between kind of where the United States military is and where society is,
Hmm.
right? And we're seeing that with our recruiting numbers. I mean, I can't remember what the latest, I'll probably get it wrong, but it's something like only 20% of American youth is even qualified to join the military, given physical things or mental things or convictions on something. And so I think you would think as a society, we'd want to buy into this. I mean, remember back to presidential fitness, all that we used
Oh
to have
yeah.
back in the day when I was a kid. But it is, I think we've gotten away from that as a society. Have you been, you guys have all been around. I mean, part of me says, man, I'd like to take a bunch of Americans and put them in Djibouti. Just a month in Djibouti, where I've seen goats and trees, right? Trying to find something to eat. And so it is, we got it really good in the US and it's real easy for all of us to get complacent and not take some of this stuff as seriously as we should.
Do you think, I mean, you kind of just hit on this, so I may be asking you to repeat yourself, but like as somebody who competes for resources at the highest level, and this is part of that competition, this kind of human factors thing, do you feel that there's just an assumption that like people are going to be fit enough, people are going to rise to the occasion, American society is going to do the thing, when in reality, like you said, maybe it's moved beyond that to the point where we do actually, as a military, have to start accounting for the fact that maybe they're not fit enough to do the thing.
Yeah, I think as an army right now, we have to assume the latter and then posture ourselves to take care of that. So you are, I don't want to get into trade-off space, right? But you are seeing that with our training doctrine command set up the future soldier prep course for that very reason. And there's 15,000 kids went through last year that couldn't meet the basic stuff, but they did coming out of there. They're graduating like 90% rate. So the desire's there. And so as an army, dealing with the product and not the treasure of America, these young men and women that are joining the army, we got to make sure they're ready to go. And I will also, where that kind of plays into with the Army Reserve, is in the past when, they only got 39 days a year, that, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer. Hey, don't spend time doing PT. Soldiers are going to have to do that on their own, right? You should be at a range, or you should be working on your vehicles or doing your MOS, setting up your stuff. And if you're a satellite unit, doing a shot or doing whatever it is. And again, I was a little bit there, not anymore. I mean, it's a great camaraderie thing with the culture. You can get kids a great workout in 45 minutes. You get cleaned up, you start your day. And that's where they learn this, and they can learn some of this. So we're getting back to that in the Army Reserve a little bit. Everywhere I go, I'm like, hey, if you got your kids together, do some PT. It's a great, and use not just, old Army 2-mile run and whatever. You do the H2F, we've got the integrators, get after it. And so you got to encourage that, even if you're not making the physical difference, you're only doing it, one day of the weekend, but it's part of the building the team.
This is a dumb question because I've never been in the Army, nor have I been in the reserves, but
you've been around a lot of military, right?
That's fair. Are you allowed to have your unit report somewhere, not, I guess, at headquarters or whatever, to do some sort of team building thing for that month instead? You're both nodding, so I'm assuming this is a thing that happens.
Yep.
Okay. Because, you see all these, like, I don't know, SEAL Fit comes to mind. I don't know why SEAL Fit comes to mind. I don't even know if they do this, but just an absolute smoke sesh over the weekend to instill a little bit of, like, physical culture. That's a thing that happens?
Yeah, that's right. And we can go, like, we did a run on the Capitol Mall, did a workout on the Capitol Mall. As a matter of fact, we just had the Army's best squad competition. And at the end of that, and that was it was 2-week competition that ended during AUSA out here on the Capitol Mall, and they did a CrossFit type rogue driven competition with rope climb and burpees and holding 100-gallon or 100-pound jugs and all this stuff, and it was probably about 20 teams for all time, but it was right there on the mall.
That's cool.
Kids were watching it. It was good. It was a good event.
I mean, there's a number of rabbit holes I want to go down right now. I'll refrain from a couple of them. I will say that the conversation we're having about, like, we have to do PT during drill because we can no longer assume that people are fit because of the way the culture is going. There's a whole public health conversation about that too. There's more reasons to be healthy and fit than just military service. Like, I think we should worry about the state of this for our country and our healthcare system, but that's beyond the scope of this conversation. So I'll bring it back in. You mentioned future soldier prep course. And if I remember the data correctly, the component of the Army with the best initial entry training success rate is actually the National Guard, largely because of the recruit sustainment program. And I should know this as a person who's in the Army Reserve now. I should really learn this. But does the Army Reserve have the ability to do a recruit sustainment program?
Can you explain what that is first?
Sorry. National Guard can bring people in before they ship to basic training, and they start attending drills, basically just preparing for basic training. And so they have a decently organized.
So they're
program.
pre-gaming. They're pre-gaming basic training.
They're essentially running their own part-time version of Future Soldier Prep course, and it's paid off for them in a big way. And I'm wondering what the reserve sees from the potential of that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think our Guard teammates, they have some advantages in that they do their own recruiting. Right. So the active duty recruits obviously for active duty, and for us in the Army Reserve, then the Guard has their own recruiting enterprise, which is a little bit better nested in the community. And so they have a little more flexibility in state status to bring soldiers who are not yet soldiers into their formations and start training them up. We do have an early entry program in the United States Army Reserve where you can sign up a kid his junior year in high school, and they wait to maybe they attend basic and then go finish their senior year, but you can then bring them in a little bit and start working them. I think that's something we probably need to look at. I'd probably look at where we could partner with the Guard on something like that and see maybe, do you have a state, have you got a state in mind where they're pretty successful with that?
I could certainly go look it up after this. I don't have one off the
Yeah.
top of my head. It's been a while since I've been working with the National Guard team over there.
Yeah.
But they definitely have some good stuff going on in a few
Somebody in
different
the
locations.
guard is just clamoring right now. They're just banging on their steering wheel like,
I am
"Come
sure
on,
the moment I
dude.
post this, 'cause I have
Tennessee, we're killing it out here."
And I'm gonna take all kinds of heat as an Army Reserve guy, freaking throwing, love to the Guard. But the Guard, it does some awesome things that I think we could partner with. I mean, we're both geographically kind of teamed up, dispersed, kind of out there alone and unafraid sometimes.
So this next one is very specific to the reserve and not the Guard, and it's an opportunity that I've talked to a bunch of people about, and I'm not sure what the hurdles to making it happen are. I know healthcare in the Army Reserve is complicated, right? In the active component, everybody's on TRICARE Prime. You don't really need to worry about who's insured by who and how it works and who can practice. You just go see a medical provider and it's good. And it's not a mistake that a large portion of any given H2F team are medical providers. But if I'm not mistaken, across the medical professions you see on an active component H2F team, physical therapy, occupational therapy, registered dietitian, the reserve has all of those in uniform, and I believe is overstrength in all of those, has a ton of those people. And from talking to a few of them, they want to practice the thing they joined the Army Reserve to do, but so often they end up kind of going to their hospital unit and doing a bunch of administrative stuff to maintain like readiness in the administrative sense, but they don't really get to go do physical therapy, occupational therapy, and dietetics. Is there a world where we can just have people like sign waivers that say, I promise not to go after the Army because this person gave me weird advice. I would love to have access to the services of these medical professionals, and then just get those people out of like the hospital headquarters units and out to all these battle assemblies that are happening to just do H2F right away for $0?
Yeah, well, it's not $0.
Sure.
Right? I mean, but
we're paying them anyway.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Right. And so, no, you're exactly right, Alex. So so short answer, yes. In fact, I have had a conversation with one of my 2-star generals, medical commanders in the 807th MCDS, right? Medical Command Direct Support. She's going to be the new Army Reserve lead for H2F. And because I said I had such phenomenal success with Rachel Waring and Sheila LaVirtue and that team there, I'm like, why aren't we not maximizing this for our H2F? Let me energize the medical profession community and make sure that all our docs and nurses and therapists and all that are tied into this and can support. And I don't think I need any kind of waiver or anything like that, especially if kids are on duty. I mean, those are licensed medical professionals. We're out there, everyone's looking at what everybody's doing and keeping everybody safe, right? So I think we have to use that to get after it. And then I always get pushback, the bureaucracy. Like I wanted to use more medical professionals for the PHAs. Oh, that's too hard. We got to have this contractor and pay $1 zillion. That's much more efficient. I'm like, how does that work? Okay, explain this to me, right? So we're working through that, and there's been places where we've been able to use those medical professionals. But I think the H2F community is a perfect example, which is why I'm kind of pinning that rose on that medical command.
I'll give you a heads up on some of the hurdles you're going to run into as a guy who's working through this in like a program director sense in the active component world right now.
Are these going to make me mad?
They're making me mad right now, so
Okay.
I may as well make other people mad. The credentialing and privileging piece of like what they're allowed to do and where they're allowed to do it and who bears the liability of it is a huge piece. The term limited scope medical care is thrown around in the DoD a lot, but as far as I can tell, it's not an actually officially defined term. And so like there's some arguments out there, and the Army seems to not worry about this. I'm working for the Air Force now, and they worry about a lot of things that the Army just kind of ignores. But like what kind of building you have to be in to do medical practice safely, Cat 500 TJC requirements, that's a whole thing. I see Drew making a face. It
It's
sounds
like
like he's dealt with this
how
before.
many hurdles can we put in the way of ourselves to do the thing that we all want to do? Like,
It's absolutely a problem, but I think a lot of it can be
oh,
solved. I mean, we have a general on the call. Almost anything can be solved with the right
Yeah.
general's signature.
Uh,
And like if we can
we'll
define what
send you
limited
some
scope care
paperwork
is,
to just sign.
because I mean, think about it though. If you're talking PTs, OTs, and RDs, if you take out anything that breaks the skin, like they're not going to do things that are you have to worry extremely about infection control. You're probably like, who knows? You can decide what they all do, but most of what we're talking about here is education and like non-invasive, kind of just exercise and lifestyle medicine sort of stuff. You shouldn't need a Cat 500 building with doors of certain widths and non-permeable floors and sharps containers and all
Handrails,
the there's just
sinks.
it's
yeah.
it doesn't seem like it'd be that hard to get past these hurdles, but every time you try and change something in the DoD, somebody comes up with a reason why you shouldn't do it. So
Yeah. I'm not tracking any of those. So I mean,
There you
not
go.
the Air Force, right? You know, it's
Heard it here
I often
first.
tell people if we could just if we can port our bureaucracy to ISIS and Al Qaeda, we'd shut them down. ISIS is not worried about that. They're not worried about what building they're in, right? And so yeah, I mean you've been on the receiving end of some quality medical care out in the middle of the forest, right?
It's
So I think, yeah, it is what it is.
Drew, I mean, you've got a headquarters at Fort Liberty. Drew's at Fort Liberty right now. I'm pretty sure a tasking just went out across the 82nd to find all the Type O soldiers so they could execute their walking blood bank plan, which
Oh,
means in the woods we have medics moving blood from one soldier to another soldier with no intermediate step.
yeah,
If we can figure out the approvals to do that, we
yeah,
can probably teach people how to exercise and what to eat.
right.
It just doesn't seem like it should be as hard as it is.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm going to follow up with 807th on that, Beth, because I'm not tracking any pushback on any of that. So,
Well, that's good to hear. Maybe they're all
yeah.
solving it. Maybe they're way better at this than I am.
I would
So
love to
yeah,
hear from them what their answers are because that would be.
yeah, I will. I will. That's
It,
crazy.
I don't know if this is even a question that makes sense to any of the three of us, but I often wonder if there's a world where you just kind of. It seems like the military is set up to where it's either medical or it's not, and I think a lot of the issues Alex just highlighted were because and a lot of times human performance is labeled as medical. But like, is there a world where it just gets reclassed as like something new, something different, or even it exists on the tactical side so you can circumvent a lot of those issues? I don't know if that solves for it. You guys would know better than me. But it seems that
Yeah,
we hamper ourselves by making it such a medical thing.
yeah. I mean, I agree with that. I think this is. I don't see H2F as a medical thing. You know, I see it as just it's fitness. I mean, I'm not when we take the ACFT and I've got NCOs out there administering it. They don't have some kind of special credentialing. They're an NCO. Right, that's the credential. And so, and they're leading the training and they're doing all that. So, and I realize, you start talking about drawing blood and doing all these things.
Hmm.
There's probably you probably want to have some checks and balances in place, I guess. But
Have some napkins nearby, probably.
yeah. But I think just using our folks and getting after it is just the right thing to do. It's what they're trained to do. And so, yeah, until somebody tells me different, I think we're just going to drive on it.
I'll pivot to a different source of talent that the reserve has separate from medical officers that appear on active duty H2F teams. I'm curious, and I know Drew's bumped into a few of these folks at Fort Liberty. We have folks who do H2F type things as their civilian career, even if that isn't their actual reserve MOS. Is there anything I'm passingly familiar with Gig Eagle and what it offers in terms of like a database of people with certain certifications, but is there any conversation out there about like leveraging people whose civilian credentials are in the H2F space, like getting Coach Brad in a uniform again and just saying, "Hey man, like we're going to put you on
Yeah.
orders for X number of days and you're going to do strength coach stuff."
Yeah, no, we don't. Not that I'm aware of. So I think that's a great idea. I mean, we're trying to track like cyber professionals and, that big data scientists and data analytics. Hey, what's your civilian skill set? You work for Google. That's awesome. We need you to do this for us. In the H2F, I'm not sure that we're chasing that hard. So we probably should. I mean, I think we probably got a lot of the medical folks do it on both sides. But I'm sure I've got some personal trainers and all those kind of things that are truck drivers. And so probably in the Army. So probably good to get after that. So I'll take that for action.
I mean, I think Drew has some personal examples. One personal example I have, he was an H2F strength and conditioning coach at Fort Liberty there. And we've had episodes about this in the past. Strength and conditioning coaches are not necessarily the best compensated of professions out there. They're historically not that well paid. He left being an H2F strength and conditioning coach to go on full-time orders as an E4 in the National Guard because it paid better to be an E4 in the National Guard than it did to be a strength coach like with a master's degree on H2F. And I know he's not alone. I know a bunch of our coaches are either reserve or National Guard soldiers, probably infantrymen and truck drivers and mechanics and things like that. But like maybe we bring them on orders and let them do H2F. They get to do the thing they love doing that they sought out as their civilian career, and they get a pretty solid, predictable career in the Army. That seems like a win-win.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
How would
If
you?
nothing else, leverage it, right? I mean, we do have the database now in IPSE where you can capture some of those civilian skills in the database you mentioned, and we're pulsing that with formation. So we at least we know where these folks are. Absolutely.
So all the coaches out there that are also reserve soldiers, make sure your IPSE stuff reflects certified strength and conditioning specialist. So when his team goes and searches, they find you.
Make sure I'm tracking.
Mops and Mo's can do some side work finding them for you.
I was going to ask how you would QC that, but I guess quality control that. I guess you would just they'd have their CSCS. I mean, would that be? Huh.
Yeah. Probably bring them in. You could churn them through our H2F, as we formalize our H2F, churn them through that a little bit. And I would imagine our master fitness trainers, the integrators, could probably help out there too.
So I typically ask this kind of like keys to the castle question jokingly to folks, like, hey, if you had all the keys to the castle, what? But like in your case, you kind of do have the keys to the castle. So this is kind of a fun one.
Yeah.
I guess the question rephrased then is like, if you had no limitations to putting together H2F for the reserve, like what would that look like?
Wow. I think, so I'm a believer in the professionals. So so if I was resource unconstrained, I probably wouldn't take it down to brigade level, but I would probably ensure geographically dispersed that I would have those professional teams, the strength and conditioning coaches, dietitians, physical therapists, all at the right echelons. Some could surge out, some could come back. And then I would try to have, we have so much data system that tracks our ACFT and all the stuff that we do. I would try to, hey, I need something, bolted onto that DTMS or the system that tracks when you go to the range, when you take the ACFT, that is tracking kind of your daily fitness. And it's, obviously HIPAA and privacy and all that, you want that, but you need some kind of way for commanders and leaders to look at their formation, engage, and ensure they're doing the right thing. Probably the professionals and having them at the right place. I mean, we've talked about starting to build reserve centers that have this capacity in them for H2F, weight rooms, an area for, but the cost is just, it becomes just very hard to execute across the Army Reserve. And so I think the getting the right professionals dispersed out, that's where the game changing stuff happens.
What is the counter argument that because again, I'm biased in this point of view. I get that, but you mentioned the cost. Like, yes, it's expensive to build what I would feasibly assume would be like, a collegiate weight room. It is expensive to do that. But again, I go back to this whole idea, like people first, people first, people first, people first. It's like, what is the counter argument that you run into when you make that argument?
How do I measure ROI?
Yep.
Right. So that is the challenge, right? Because even at the 81st, and this would be great to get your insights on this, it was, hey, we're spending this much money for all the right reasons to bring these professionals in. We're surging them out, paying travel to have them go to an MP brigade in Nashville that had a great leadership, great fitness focused culture. How do I measure ROI for these kids? Is it weight loss? Is it how am I tracking sleep? Is it just ACFT score? I mean, we get jammed up on the ROI a little bit. And I understand you got to quantify it. We're spending hard-earned taxpayer dollars. But that is where you run into a little bit of a challenge in our world.
I don't know if this is a question or a comment or like a conversation I want to have. I've had it before in other settings, and
It's like a hill we're building to die on, I think, is where we're
yeah,
at with
like once the
this.
hill's building
We're
up, yeah,
building this
exactly.
hill so we can die on it.
So you're in the kind of position where you have to like go interface with Congress to get resources to take care of soldiers.
Right.
And I 8 years active duty, I guess going on 4 now of reserve. When a vehicle or a weapon system is broken, nobody asks what the return on investment is for fixing it. The return on investment is the thing works, right? If like a tank is broken, it needs a new transmission. That's a whole
Right.
ton of money, but you don't have to justify it to anyone. You just tell them the tank's broken, it needs a new transmission. That's what's going to make it work. But as soon as we start talking about humans, there's this whole question of how does this actually save us money? And it feels odd that we have to work harder to justify that it's worth it when we're putting money into people than we do when we're putting money into Abrams and
Machines.
howitzers and Apaches and jets and whatever. I don't.
Yeah.
That didn't end with a question mark, but
No, I think it's the, so it kind of gets to the Army just competing for resources in general across the Department of Defense. We actually have a bit of a challenge because our number one weapon system is the human, right? Whereas the Air Force has got planes. It's very easy to quantify how much an F-35 costs or an aircraft carrier. And Congress loves those things because they're built in their district, right? We're not building soldiers in their district. And so when when the chief is trying to get after kit for soldiers or these kind of things, it does make it harder. And I'm with you, Alex, Andrew. We got to invest in our people. It's just the right thing to do. And sometimes it takes a little while to measure ROI. You know, if you fit skeletal injuries, less injuries, more resilience, suicide rates going down, however we want to measure it. But at the end of the day, I think it's getting those professionals out and probably getting some congressmen, congresswomen out to see what's going on, have them go through a couple workouts, see the challenges that the Guard and Reserve have. We took them to the Spark at Fort Jackson, and they saw what was happening there, and it is a game changer. So we just got to keep staying after it.
you got my gears turning now. Yes, like we'll give into the cynicism, right? Members of Congress love stuff that brings industry to their district. Fantastic. We get it. That's how it works. But if there's one weapon system that we're building in every single district in America, it's humans. And maybe we need to communicate with Congress on how H2F is both a public health initiative, it's an initiative that will employ professionals in these spaces in damn near every district in America. Like maybe, and I don't know what that looks like. I don't know. Like I barely understand what
That's beautiful. There should be an
there's a
eagle behind you.
I mean, listen, there's a public health officer commissioned corps in like as part of the United States government. Like maybe we're talking to them, maybe we're talking to healthcare systems across the country about how they can leverage some version of lifestyle medicine or preventive
Oh, but then
medicine
you're
or
getting into
whatever.
private insurance. Like that's a whole can of
I know
worms.
it's complicated, but like we overcome it to build F-35s and we overcome it to build
Yeah.
Abrams tanks and armories and depots and these things that we have all over the Army that people barely think about. But like we're building humans in their district. Healthcare is one of the most profitable industries in the world. Maybe we leverage a piece of that towards actual performance and prevention.
But I think the issue is healthcare is profitable because they're profiting off people not performing well and not being healthy. If you have people healthy, it becomes less profitable.
That's why I mean we got to find a way to make it work for everybody, right? We can be cynical here.
Yeah.
I'm cynical about it too. I think the state of public health in America is not good. But if it's creating jobs for coaches, educators, medical professionals, people who build gyms, if it's creating more like training space and like I just saw a county opened up like a joint like BMX park slash bouldering wall thing that looks really cool. Like just there's ways that people can make money in their districts that lead to fitness and health and making the culture more oriented that way. And if the Army has to lead the way because you have to be fit to go to combat, that's fine. But fitness and health will help everybody, not just the Army.
Yeah, no, I think, I think you probably hit on something there, Alex. And this is what I was kind of working with 81st before I left was how can we partner with the Guard to like build a community spark, right? Or one of these where there's a little bit of investment from the Army Reserve, the Army National Guard, and a local community, YMCA type, a little bit of the YMCA model. And then you've got kids out there, and what is the density of Army Reserve soldiers that are close to that? Hey, we can maximize use. No, I think it's more than a partnership with, Planet Fitness or Gold's Gym or One Life, but it is something where you invest in the community. And that's where I do keep coming back to. For us, I think for the National Guard communities that have really gotten on board, I think we have a real advantage to partner up there and just do a couple pilots and see what this looks like. And for sure, put it at all our training areas. So where I have the Fort McCoy, Wisconsin Army Reserve, why don't I have a Spark there? I've always got soldiers going through there. Why don't I have a fitness team dedicated to that? NTC, right? Liberty would be a good place to have one. I got a lot of Army Reserve formations in there. Partner up with.
I got you. I'll take care of Liberty. You'll figure out the rest. I'll take care.
Hey,
of
I'll be down there in December. We need to sync up.
I'll be down there too. We'll hang out.
I'll buy you a beer at the Mash House.
Boom.
So, and this, we're starting to get into stuff that I think is like really big picture, like game changing kind of stuff. But I've been thinking about this the last couple of weeks specifically because, I mean, my team now in my day job, physical therapist, strength and conditioning coach, cognitive performance, all these H2FE kinds of things. And the frequency with which we see folks who they had their classic 20 or 30 minute with their primary care provider, that person tells you, hey man, you got like a herniated disc, or hey man, your blood pressure's a little high. Like, go do these things, but I don't have enough time to give you real guidance and you're still really confused about it. We bridge that gap for people all the time. Their doctor told them they need to do load bearing exercise to improve their bone density. They don't know what to do. My coach will take care of them. Yeah. Somebody is dealing with something where they got to work on their nutrition, but they don't really know what steps to take. Got it. Coaches can help you with that. We'll talk through some of these lifestyle habit things. And that is just as in need in the civilian population. So now it's starting to switch from like, how do we learn from civilian sector to how can, and I think this is part of the mission of the Guard and Reserve. I'm not totally familiar with it, but like how they give back to their local communities.
Yes.
Like maybe there's a place where H2F can bridge that like medical to lifestyle health gap for the local communities as well. Not necessarily just soldiers. We can show how it's done. It's not perfect here yet, but we're figuring a lot of things out that the civilian medical system hasn't quite figured out yet.
Yeah, no, I think there'd probably be some authorities we'd have to work through if I had H2F professionals dealing with the community type stuff. But I think the more you can nest with your community and leverage, work together, I think that there's huge value there. It's just managing, the nuance. I mean, you got kids coming from maybe 50 miles from that community coming in, or 40 miles, and it gets back to, you want to invest in the community, but you also, the Army's going to hold me accountable for, fit and resilient soldiers and these dollars I'm spending. So it's that balance that we're trying to get after. And it's hard because it does take the fitness H2F professionals to really drive that change. I mean, I guess, have you had environments, either one of you, where the virtual engagement has been very productive and there's platforms that really allow that for like someone who's never worked out before?
So I think one of the big hurdles is, and I think Drew was about to bring up intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation.
Yeah, you're stealing my question.
I'm not going to steal it, I promise. But we have totally seen places where virtual engagement can lead to really. I mean, the obvious example is we run a program that people can pay to participate in. They get programming, and we've seen awesome results in terms of return from injury, in terms of ACFT scores, in terms of succeeding at military schools. But the difference is, and we've had this conversation on the podcast before about buy-in. People in the military talk about buy-in all the time. The people that are on our program literally bought in. They decided to spend money on it. They were intrinsically motivated enough to put their own money into getting it. And even with that population, Drew, what, like our average participant, what percentage of the workouts do they actually complete?
Well, they log probably less than half.
Yeah. So like even with an intrinsically motivated population that is paying for, and not every workout you do gets logged. People get annoyed with clicking through all the stuff in the app. I get it. When I was doing virtual programs, I never logged it. I just looked at the workout, wrote it on my whiteboard, and did my thing. Probably really annoying for the coach.
So you're one of those people.
Yeah, sorry, Drew.
You're part of the problem. Great.
So it's pretty easy, actually, in an environment where people are intrinsically motivated. They've already made the choice to participate. What makes the military setting so much harder and I remember having these conversations early on. Go to any CrossFit gym, you're going to see like awesome vibes and awesome buy-in, and everybody's trying to do it. Go to any given platoon or company, you're not going to see that level of energy. But that's because there's a difference between something you chose to pay your money for and something you're forced to do. And we can talk about whether you're forced
Yeah.
to or not, but that's the hard piece of this whole thing. Active duty, reserve doesn't matter. Like when the government gives you something, it's a lot less exciting than when you bought it because you thought it was cool.
Well, you didn't steal my question. You teed me up perfectly for
There we
this.
go.
So as the person who's in charge of most people you talk to, how do you get an honest answer about the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to the problems you're trying to solve? Because I could imagine like if somebody came into my formation at the level that you're at, clean up everything, fix everything, don't say this, don't say that. Like how do you get the truth?
Yeah, that's you'd be surprised. I guess the younger soldiers have no problem.
That's
No
fair.
problem. Right? I mean, really. And it is, hey, what can I do? What's wrong? Who do you want to throw under the bus? You joke with them, whatever, but you really try to get, and typically, especially if they're frustrated with something, I feel like nobody's been listening to them. Then you can get some pretty honest feedback, and you got to kind of filter through it sometimes to make sure you understand exactly the point they're making, where the problem is. But you get some pretty honest feedback. I met with some young soldiers today. It was virtual. They were at Fort Knox, but it was company commanders and first sergeants and talking through some of their challenges and I asked them, has your battalion commander visited you? Raise your hand. And only like a third of them raised their hand. I'm like, what's happening? These kids are out there alone and unafraid, and they're not being empowered by or mentored by their leaders. So working through that, but sometimes it's the more senior folks that want to tell you what you want to hear.
Hmm.
And so that's where you do your best to create a culture that encourages honest dialogue. Let's have the discussion. We might do it, we might not, but at the end of the day, we're all going to understand why we're doing what we're doing. And that's always you just got to have that transparent conversation is what I found. And then people, it might take a little while. Hey, I didn't get my head ripped off for saying that thing. And they actually implemented 1/3 of what I said. That helps with buy-in too. And so, yeah. But that's the younger kids, no problem. It's some of the more seasoned folks that you got to be worried about. They're telling you what you want to hear.
Well, and I wanted to ask as kind of a follow on, I think, is this is something that I think about, and we've touched on it, I think, circuitously as we've been talking, but in my opinion, a huge element of the success or failure of human performance at large, not just in the military, but specific to the military, is the subjective component. I mean, intrinsic motivation, all of these squishy human things that you can't put onto a PowerPoint. But when I'm briefing somebody at your level, not, I mean, obviously not you specifically, but like it typically comes down to what can you put on a PowerPoint to show me that this thing's working? Injury rates, ACFT scores. We're kind of getting into sleep, but like, how do you quantify that? No
Right.
pun intended, but Lord knows how to quantify spirituality. Like, so you lose a lot of the squishiness that I think actually drives these programs. So, at your level, how do you account for the subjective stuff when what you're being rated on when you're asking for money at like a congressional level is very, very objective?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're talking about it's kind of the conversation we had earlier, Drew. It's on investing in people.
Hmm.
And you try to articulate, hey, I may or may not see some kind of quantifiable ROI, but this is just the right thing to do, right? And we have all the medical data and scientific data that says this is how humans best lead their lives, and it leads to this positive thing and this positive thing. And so this is what we're trying to implement. And then you try to show, hey, this is what we're doing to try to be resource conscious, and we're cutting spending here, and we're doing this, and this is where we're investing our money. I think it'll manifest itself in retention rates. That's probably the most important thing. And, satisfaction rates, we do surveys with soldiers, but it's just the right thing to do. And so as science changes, as all we get new information about how to do this whole H2F thing, we just got to go for it. And I tell you, someone you should have on your show, if you haven't, is the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, Jim Mingus.
He's on our list.
We would
He
love to
would
have
love
him
to
on.
do this. He would love to do this, and he is all in on this kind of stuff. And he's in the gym every morning when I'm in there here at 4 Mile.
He's given Army Reserve me a lot of work to do at my last annual training.
Okay.
His announcement about we got to bring H2F to the entire army. The amount of staff work it takes to even figure out where the entire army is.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, let me help you with that.
yeah.
Oh,
Let me help you
man.
with the Army Reserve piece anyway.
Before we cut the recording, I want to ask, when it comes to H2F, I know you've touched on some of this already, but with the reserves, what are you most excited about for the future of this thing?
I think changing the culture, right? And seeing kids buy totally into total fitness, holistic fitness, not to, be corny, but it used to be we're out there and you do your 2 mile run, you do your push-ups, sit-ups, 2 mile run. There was a little bit on eating, not so much. Where I have seen, again, the professionals embedded, the master fitness trainers getting it. I go to units where they're doing creative workouts that are total body workouts. And then you got some OPD with some spiritual or dietary stuff. You're seeing the culture start to buy in. And so I think that's the biggest thing. This is General Funk, when he was the TRADOC commander, kind of the whole ACFT, H2F thing was taken off. He talked about culture. General Townsend after him, and I'm a believer. I think that's what I'm most excited about.
Awesome. Well, as somebody who's far busier than we are, thank you for taking the time to come and chat with us.
Hey, my pleasure, Drew, Alex. You guys have been awesome. I appreciate what you're doing. Y'all are making a difference. So I hope anything I can do to help, and I hope to pull you into what we're doing.
Awesome. Thank you.
Same thing. Vice versa.
Awesome. Y'all have a great night.
Welcome to Closing Comments, brought to you by Drew and Alex. If you've made it this far, you would have just finished our conversation with the man in charge of the entire reserve component of the U.S. Army. You heard it in the episode, the keys to the castle question. Oftentimes we ask that question to people who can't really actually make a huge difference, but in this case he can. And so the fact that he took the time to have a conversation with us, I thought was super awesome. I appreciate the transparency. I don't know how you solve for the reserve H2F. I don't have the answer.
I don't know how you solve it necessarily, but this felt like a conversation that might have made an actual difference in some things. I don't know how much he'll be able to take for action. I don't know how much was useful or how much people are already working on. I imagine I'll get a lot of messages as people listen to this one about things they're already doing at local levels, at recruiting stations, at ROTC programs, at reserve units, at National Guard units. My goal for this conversation was it would be kind of a workshop environment where we just kind of bat some ideas around and see what has the potential to go somewhere. And it seemed to be that. So I'm pretty stoked.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe this is a thread we pull on in future episodes, but the intrinsic motivation piece of human performance, I don't think gets enough. It either doesn't get enough spotlight or people just assume it's there. And then when stuff fails, they wonder why objectively things are failing. And it's like, well, you don't have any, people don't like you.
Well, I remember, and we've had a couple conversations related to this on podcasts over the years. One is the fact that having personal trainer experience might be just as relevant to military human performance as strength coach experience, because you had to sell.
Yeah.
And the other one is, and I remember when I was really new to this space and going and checking things out, we have had Chris McNamara on the podcast. I remember going to his facility and seeing how the environment was there, and then going to even pretty elite special operations human performance spaces. You just can't find the same energy, the same vibe, the same competitiveness, all these things. But that's nothing on the people running those special operations facilities. It's just the fact that at a private facility, people are paying to be there. They chose to be there. You are only working with people who care enough to spend a bunch of money to be there. And you're just never going to achieve that same level in a military human performance setting. You can strive towards it, and there's things you can do to build that culture. But if people are told they have to be there, it's just going to be a different environment than if people are paying for the privilege of being there.
Well, and that becomes a million times more difficult when you only see them 1 weekend a month.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, to your point, very much a workshop episode. Really cool to do that with a 3-star general. That was fun. So yeah, stay tuned. Probably some follow-on conversations to come from this, but thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsinmos.com. That's mops, the letter N, mos.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us. The blog posts go a little bit more in depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsinmos.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.